The stars themselves seemed to tear open when the Zarketh Armada emerged above Earth's orbit. One moment, the night sky was peaceful and familiar. The next, 300 warships materialized in a perfect formation that stretched from the moon to the upper atmosphere. Their hulls were dark metal, covered in symbols that looked like ancient scars. Each ship was larger than any aircraft carrier humanity had ever built. On Earth, telescopes and satellites picked up the massive fleet immediately. Within seconds, every military command center on the planet came alive with urgent activity. Red lights flashed in underground bunkers from Washington to Moscow to Beijing. Generals grabbed phones. Presidents were woken from sleep. The world held its breath. The aliens made contact first. A signal burst across every communication frequency that humans used. Radio, television, internet, even emergency services channels suddenly carried the same message. A translator program embedded in their transmission converted their words into every human language simultaneously. The message was simple and terrifying. Primitive species of the third planet, you have been selected for incorporation into the Zarketh Empire. Resistance is futile and will result in total extinction. You have one standard rotation period to surrender your governments, your weapons, and your autonomy. This is your only warning. The voice was cold and mechanical, stripped of any emotion that might suggest the possibility of negotiation. It sounded like a recording that had been used countless times before, on countless other worlds that no longer existed as free civilizations. The United Nations Emergency Council convened within minutes. Leaders from every nation appeared on screens, their faces showing a mixture of fear, anger, and determination. The Secretary General, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, spoke first. Her voice was calm despite the chaos erupting across the globe. We respond with an offer of peace, she said. Prepare a diplomatic message. All channels. We will not fire first. The message went out immediately. Humanity explained that Earth was home to billions of sentient beings who valued peace and cooperation. They offered to share knowledge, culture, and friendship with these visitors from the stars. They asked for dialogue, for understanding, for time to meet properly as two civilizations should. The Zarketh response came 30 seconds later. Not in words, but in fire. The International Space Station exploded in a brilliant flash that could be seen from the ground. 6 astronauts died instantly, vaporized by an energy beam that struck with surgical precision. 3 commercial satellites followed, torn apart by kinetic rounds that moved faster than human radar could track. Debris began raining down through the atmosphere, burning bright streaks across the sky. But the aliens were not finished with their demonstration. A small research island in the Pacific Ocean, home to a marine biology station, simply ceased to exist. The energy weapon struck with such force that it boiled the ocean around the island, sending up a column of steam 3 miles high. 200 scientists, their families, and support staff were gone before they could even understand what was happening. Where the island had been, only a crater remained beneath the waves. Then came the simultaneous strikes on military targets. 5 nations felt the wrath of the Zarketh in the same instant. An army base in Germany was reduced to a smoking crater. A naval yard in Japan became twisted metal and fire. Air Force installations in Brazil, South Africa, and Canada were hit with such precision that it was clear the aliens had been watching Earth for some time, mapping its defenses, identifying its warriors. The Zarketh commander spoke again, his tone unchanged, as if the deaths of nearly 1,000 humans were meaningless statistics. Your primitive weapons are toys. Your defenses are nothing. Your appeal for peace shows only weakness. The Zarketh do not negotiate with prey animals. You have one rotation. Surrender or your cities will burn. Your oceans will boil. Your species will become a memory that no one will remember. This is the mercy we offer. Take it or die. In command centers around the world, military leaders watched their screens with expressions that the Zarketh could not see and would not have understood if they could. These were not the faces of defeated people. These were not the expressions of a species about to surrender. In Geneva, Dr. Chen looked at the representatives of every nation on Earth. Behind them, teams of analysts worked frantically, calculating trajectories, measuring response times, identifying patterns in the alien attack vectors. Supercomputers processed data at speeds that pushed their processors to the limit. They gave us one rotation, she said quietly. 24 hours. They think we need time to accept defeat and prepare our surrender. She paused, then looked directly at the military commander standing beside her. How long do you need? The general, a man who had spent 40 years preparing for a day he had hoped would never come, checked his watch. His face was grim but determined. 20 minutes, Madam Secretary. Give me 20 minutes, Dr. Chen nodded slowly. She typed a command into her terminal, entering a code that required her biometric signature, her password, and a physical key that she wore around her neck. Similar actions were happening in 12 other locations around the world, as other leaders entered their own codes. Then you have 20 minutes, General. Make them count. What the Zarketh did not know, what they could not have known, was that humanity had been preparing for this moment since the first nuclear weapons proved that extinction was possible. Every generation since had added to Earth's defenses, creating systems that were hidden, distributed, and waiting. Waiting for the day when something came from the stars that did not come in peace. That day had arrived. The aliens had wanted to provoke fear. They had wanted humanity to understand its place in a galaxy where strength was the only law that mattered. They had wanted to make an example of Earth, as they had made examples of 47 other civilizations before this one. They had succeeded in provoking something. But it was not fear. It was something far more dangerous. They had provoked humanity itself, and now they would learn why that was a fatal mistake. The countdown began. 20 minutes until Earth responded. 20 minutes that would change the galaxy forever. The timer read 0 minutes and 0 seconds when Earth's hidden defenses came alive. Around the planet, systems that had been disguised as peaceful infrastructure suddenly revealed their true purpose. Communication satellites adjusted their positions with movements too precise and too fast for civilian equipment. Weather monitoring stations in orbit rotated on axes they were never supposed to have. Deep space telescopes that were supposed to look outward into the cosmos turned inward, focusing on the alien fleet with sensors designed for much more than simple observation. The Zarketh commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, the massive warship called the Talon of Dominion. He watched Earth turning below with the satisfied patience of a predator that knew its prey was trapped. In his experience, which spanned 30 years of conquest across the outer spiral arm, this was the easy part. The primitives would spend their rotation in panic and chaos. Some would demand surrender. Others would call for futile resistance. In the end, they always surrendered. They always chose survival over pride. He did not notice when the first railgun fired. The weapon was hidden inside what Earth's public records listed as a telecommunications relay satellite. The projectile was a tungsten rod, 3 meters long and half a meter wide. It had no explosive warhead because it did not need one. Accelerated to nearly 1% of light speed, it carried kinetic energy that made nuclear weapons look primitive by comparison. The rod struck a Zarketh destroyer amidships. The alien vessel's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and absorb explosive force, were useless against simple mass moving at relativistic speeds. The tungsten punched through the hull like it was paper. The destroyer came apart in a silent explosion of atmosphere, fuel, and debris that scattered across 100 miles of space. Before the Zarketh commander could even process what had happened, 17 more railguns fired from 17 different disguised platforms. 17 more ships died in the span of 4 seconds. The commander began shouting orders, but his words were lost in the chaos erupting across his bridge. Alarms blared. Screens showed impossible data. Ships were dying, and his sensors could not track the source of the attacks. The weapons were too fast, the firing solutions too precise, coming from angles that should have been covered by nothing but primitive civilian equipment. Ground-based systems joined the attack at minute 3. What the aliens had catalogued as radio telescope arrays were actually directed energy weapons. Their massive dishes capable of focusing microwave radiation into beams that could cut through starship armor like a blowtorch through ice. The weapons fired in carefully coordinated sequences, each beam calibrated to a different frequency to overwhelm the alien. Shields through harmonics that the Zarketh engineers had never anticipated. The cruiser tried to dive into Earth's atmosphere to escape the orbital fire. It died before completing the maneuver, its hull split open by 6 different beam weapons firing simultaneously. The wreckage tumbled down into the ocean, creating a splash that would register on seismographs as a minor earthquake. Submarine-launched kinetic missiles rose from the depths at minute 5. These weapons had been deployed in the deepest parts of every ocean, waiting in silence for decades. They were cold launch systems, expelled from their tubes by compressed air before their rocket motors ignited. By the time the Zarketh sensors detected them, the missiles were already in space and beginning their terminal attack runs. The missiles did not follow predictable trajectories. They jinked and weaved under AI guidance using thrust vectoring that pushed beyond what living pilots could have survived. Each missile carried a payload of tungsten ball bearings, thousands of them, released in a spreading cloud at the final moment. At orbital velocities, those ball bearings became a shotgun blast that could shred anything in their path. Fighter drones launched at minute 8. They came from underground silos that had been built in desert regions, Arctic wastelands, and deep forests, places where satellite surveillance would see nothing but empty land. The drones were small and fast, powered by compact fusion reactors that gave them acceleration curves no human-piloted craft could match. Each one carried enough computing power to make real-time tactical decisions, coordinating with its fellows in a swarm intelligence that adapted to every move the enemy made. The Zarketh fighters scrambled to meet them, expecting a conventional dogfight. What they got was a massacre. The human drones did not think like living pilots. They did not fear death because they had no life to lose. They made attack runs that would have killed any biological pilot through sheer G-forces, pulling turns at accelerations that liquefied the internal systems of the alien fighters before they could respond. A Zarketh battlecruiser attempted to bring its main guns to bear on the surface targets. The ship never completed the targeting sequence. Nuclear-pumped laser arrays fired from the far side of the moon, from a base that the aliens had never detected because they had never thought to look. The lasers were powered by shaped nuclear explosions contained in magnetic bottles, channeling energy that briefly matched the output of a small star. The battlecruiser's shields held for almost 3 seconds. Then they collapsed, and the lasers carved through the hull like knives through butter. Secondary explosions rippled along the ship's length as reactor containment failed. The vessel broke into 3 pieces, each one tumbling away into the black. At minute 12, the Zarketh flagship tried to retreat. The commander, finally understanding that he was not facing a primitive species but a prepared and deadly enemy, ordered the fleet to withdraw and regroup. It was the tactically correct decision, the same decision that had saved his forces in previous campaigns when faced with unexpected resistance. But this time, there was nowhere to retreat to. Human forces had surrounded the fleet without the aliens even realizing it. Satellites that had seemed harmless were now revealed as weapons platforms. Drones that had approached under minimal power signatures were now active and hunting. Even the debris from destroyed alien ships had been weaponized, caught by tractor beams and accelerated back toward the remaining vessels. At minute 17, the flagship itself took damage. A railgun round struck the command tower, depressurizing 3 decks and killing dozens of officers. The ship's AI began screaming alerts about cascade failures in the primary power systems. Escape pods started launching as crew members abandoned their posts in panic. The Zarketh commander, bleeding from a head wound and clutching a broken arm, transmitted one final message. His voice was filled with disbelief and horror. "Impossible," he whispered. "You are a pre-FTL species. You should not have these weapons. You should not have this coordination. How did you prepare for this? How did you know?" No one answered him. 20 seconds later, the flagship's reactor went critical. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface, a new star that flared and died in the span of a heartbeat. At minute 20, the shooting stopped. The silence was deafening. 287 Zarketh warships had been destroyed or disabled. 4 had been captured intact when their crews surrendered, begging for mercy in transmissions that were monitored by species across half the galaxy. The mighty armada that had conquered 47 star systems had been broken in less time than it took to watch a television show. In Geneva, Dr. Chen listened to the casualty reports. 723 humans had died, most of them in the initial strikes before Earth could respond. Each death was a tragedy that would be mourned. Each name would be remembered. But humanity had survived. Earth had survived. And the galaxy had just learned a lesson that would echo across the stars for generations to come. Never provoke humanity, not unless you are prepared for. The emergency broadcast that went out across the galaxy was not supposed to reach civilian channels. It was a military distress signal, encrypted with codes that only warfaring species were supposed to understand. But in the chaos of the fleet's destruction, The encryption had broken down. Anyone with a radio telescope and basic translation software could hear the final transmissions of the Zarketh Armada. They were hearing screams. Pleas for mercy. Warriors who had never known defeat, begging for their lives in a dozen different languages as their ships came apart around them. And beneath it all, a single question repeated over and over. How? How did the primitives do this? On the planet Zelthar, 300 light-years from Earth, a council of the Galactic Assembly met in emergency session. The Assembly was not a government in any real sense. It was more like a forum where civilized species could meet, trade, and occasionally agree on basic rules of engagement. Wars happened, but they followed protocols. Conquests occurred, but they had limits. The galaxy was a dangerous place, but it was not chaos. Until now. Ambassador Vector, a being that looked like a cross between a mantis and a bear, stood before the council chamber. His species, the Thelnari, were known for their careful nature and their long memories. They had survived in the galaxy for over 1,000,000 years by being very good at assessing threats. The Zarketh were a middle-tier military power, he said, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into words that everyone could understand. They had conquered 47 systems. Their fleet was larger than most. Their warriors were experienced, and they were destroyed by a species that does not even have faster-than-light travel. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some species claimed the reports must be exaggerated. Others insisted there must have been a technical malfunction in the Zarketh ships. A few suggested that Earth must have received help from another spacefaring civilization, perhaps as part of some elaborate scheme. But the data was clear. The Thelnari had long-range sensors pointed at that region of space. They had recordings of the battle. 20 minutes from first shot to final surrender. No outside help. No technical malfunction, just brutal, efficient, overwhelming force delivered with precision that suggested decades of preparation. They were ready, Vector said quietly. The humans were waiting for us. On Earth, the reality of what humanity had accomplished was beginning to sink in. The United Nations held a joint session, broadcast live to every device on the planet. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the podium, looking out at representatives from every nation. Behind her, screens showed images of the captured alien ships being towed to secure facilities. Recovery teams were already in space collecting wreckage for analysis. For 75 years, she began, we have prepared for this day. Since the moment we understood that nuclear weapons made extinction possible, every generation has asked the same question. What if the threat comes from outside? What if we are not alone, and what if our neighbors are not friendly? She touched a control, and the screens changed to show declassified files. Projects with names like Guardian, Sentinel, and Overwatch. Weapons development programs hidden inside civilian space agencies. Military installations disguised as research stations. An entire infrastructure of defense that had been built slowly, carefully, and in complete secrecy over the course of 3/4 of a century. We hoped we would never need these systems, Chen continued. We genuinely wanted first contact to be peaceful. Every probe we sent into space carried messages of friendship. Every signal we broadcast spoke of our desire for cooperation and understanding. But hope is not a strategy. Hope does not keep people safe when someone decides to take what is yours by force. The screens showed the tungsten rods being manufactured in orbit, the railguns being tested on asteroids far from Earth, the AI systems learning to coordinate defensive patterns. Thousands of scientists and engineers had worked on these projects. Billions of dollars had been quietly redirected from other programs. Entire careers had been spent on systems that might never be used until they were needed. And then they had worked perfectly. We are not warmongers, Chen said firmly. Look at our history. Yes, we have fought among ourselves. Yes, we have made terrible mistakes. But we have also built the United Nations. We have created laws of war. We have established the principle that some things are wrong, no matter who does them or why. We did not want to kill those aliens, but we would not allow them to kill us without response. The captured Zarketh prisoners were being held in a facility in Switzerland. They were being treated according to the rules laid out in the Geneva Convention, a document they had never heard of from a species they had expected to enslave. They received medical care for their injuries. They were given food that was as close to their nutritional needs as human scientists could determine. They were allowed to communicate with each other under supervision. The aliens could not understand it, By their laws, by the rules of the galaxy as they knew it, they should have been executed or enslaved in turn. That was how war worked. Victors took what they wanted from the defeated. Mercy was weakness. Compassion was foolishness, but the humans treated them like prisoners who had rights. Like beings whose lives had value even in defeat. It was baffling and disturbing in ways the Zarketh could not articulate. They had expected monsters. They had found something far stranger. They had found people who fought like demons but refused to become demonic. In a laboratory complex built deep under the Rocky Mountains, human scientists were examining the captured ships with barely contained excitement. Faster-than-light drives, energy shielding, artificial gravity, technologies that Earth had theorized about but never achieved. Now they had working examples, and teams of researchers were already reverse engineering the principles. Dr. James Morton, head of the Xenotechnology Division, stood in front of a Zarketh FTL drive with the expression of a child on Christmas morning. His team had been studying the device for 18 hours straight without sleep. "It is elegant," he said to his colleague. "Completely different from our theoretical models, but the math works. We can build this. Give us a year, maybe 2, and we will have human ships that can travel between stars." The implications were staggering. Earth would not remain isolated anymore. Humanity could reach out to other species, could trade and communicate and explore, but they could also defend their interests across interstellar distances. They could ensure that what happened with the Zarketh could never happen again. The debate that followed consumed the planet for weeks. Should humanity hide, maintaining radio silence and hoping the galaxy forgot about them? Should they reach out carefully, seeking allies and friends while avoiding potential enemies? Or should they make a statement, showing the galaxy exactly what kind of species they were? In the end, the decision was made by consensus rather than any single vote. Humanity would not hide. They had never been good at hiding from challenges. They would go out into the galaxy with open hands and watchful eyes. They would seek peace but remain ready for war. They would be exactly what they had always been, a species that could be the best of friends or the worst of enemies, depending entirely on how they were treated. The first human faster-than-light ship was already under construction in orbit. It would carry a crew of diplomats, scientists, and yes, soldiers. It would carry a message that humanity wanted to deliver in person, and it would carry the knowledge that Earth was no longer alone, no longer helpless, and no longer willing to be anyone's victim. The galaxy was about to meet humanity on humanity's terms, and the galaxy was about to learn that some species were far more dangerous when they loved peace than when they loved war. 6 months after the 20-minute war, the first human faster-than-light ship prepared for launch. It was called the Eunice Indomitable, named after the quality that had defined humanity's response to the Zarketh attack. The ship was not beautiful by any traditional standard. It was functional, built with human engineering principles combined with alien technology that engineers were still learning to understand fully. But it was fast, it was well-armed, and most importantly, it worked. Captain Maria Vasquez stood on the bridge looking at the faces of her crew. Diplomats who spoke 20 languages. Scientists who had spent careers preparing for contact with alien life. Medical personnel trained in xenobiology. Marines who carried weapons that could punch through ship hulls. They were, in every sense, humanity's best hope for making a good second impression on the galaxy. "Status report," she said calmly. "FTL drive is green," her chief engineer responded. He was a man named Chen Wei, nephew of the UN Secretary General and one of the people who had helped reverse engineer the alien technology. "Navigation has coordinates locked. We can jump whenever you give the order, Captain." Vasquez nodded slowly. Through the viewport, she could see Earth turning below them, so blue, so fragile-looking from up here, home to 8 billion people who were counting on this mission to succeed, home to a species that had just announced its presence to the galaxy in the most violent way possible. "Take us out," she ordered. "Destination? Zarketh Prime. It is time we had a proper conversation with our neighbors." The jump was nothing like the science fiction stories had predicted. There was no dramatic tunnel of light, no sense of movement or acceleration. One moment the ship was in Earth orbit. The next moment it was 20 light-years away, emerging in the outer system of a red dwarf star that the Zarketh called home. Alarms immediately began blaring in every military installation on 6 different moons. The Zarketh had not forgotten the destruction of their armada. They had not forgotten the humans. And now a human ship had appeared in their home system, seemingly out of nowhere, carrying unknown weapons and unknown intentions. Vasquez opened all communication channels. Her message was broadcast in Zarketh language, using the translation protocols that human linguists had extracted from captured computer systems. Her voice was clear and firm, carrying no hint of fear or aggression. "This is Captain Maria Vasquez of the United Nations Earthship Indomitable. We come under a flag of truce and diplomatic immunity. We are here to deliver a message and return prisoners. We will not fire unless fired upon. We ask for the opportunity to speak." The response took 3 minutes. When it came, the voice was old and tired. It belonged to war leader Corthan, the highest military authority among the Zarketh people. He had led their conquest for 20 years. He had overseen the subjugation of 47 civilizations. And now he was speaking to representatives of the species that had shattered his greatest fleet in less time than it took to eat a meal. "You return prisoners?" he asked, and there was genuine confusion in his translated words. "Why? By what law are you bound to show mercy to defeated enemies?" "By our law," Vasquez replied. "By the rules we have made for ourselves about how warfare should be conducted. Your warriors attacked us. We defended ourselves, but we take no pleasure in killing, and we do not continue violence when it is no longer necessary. We have 732 survivors from your fleet. We are returning them to you, unharmed and in good health." There was a longer pause this time. Vasquez could imagine the discussions happening on the other end of the transmission, the Zarketh trying to understand this alien logic, trying to figure out if this was some kind of trick or trap. "You may approach Zarketh Prime," Corthan finally said. "You will be met by escort vessels. If you deviate from the designated flight path, you will be fired upon. If you deploy weapons, you will be destroyed. Do you understand these terms?" "We understand and accept," Vasquez confirmed. "Transmitting our flight path now. We will follow your escort exactly." The approach to Zarketh Prime took 6 hours. The planet was larger than Earth, with red-orange skies and vast oceans that looked almost purple in the light of their sun. Cities sprawled across 3 continents, connected by infrastructure that spoke of a civilization thousands of years old. Orbital stations dotted the space around the planet, some of them clearly military, others dedicated to industry or research. The Indomitable was met by 24 warships, each one keeping weapons locked on the human vessel. Vasquez kept her crew calm and professional, following every instruction exactly. They docked at a military station, and the prisoners were transferred through an airlock, under the watchful eyes of armed guards on both sides. The Zarketh soldiers who stepped through the airlock were not the same warriors who had attacked Earth 6 months ago. They were thinner, marked by the psychological strain of captivity and defeat. But they were alive and they were whole, and they carried with them stories that would spread through the Zarketh military like wildfire. Stories about humans who had treated them with dignity, even after defeating them. About medical care that saved lives. About food provided even when it was difficult to determine what their biology could process. About a species that could kill with devastating efficiency, but chose restraint when restraint was possible. Corthan himself came to the docking station to witness the prisoner exchange. He was an old warrior, his carapace scarred from dozens of battles, his multiple eyes sharp with intelligence that had been honed over centuries of conflict. He looked at Vasquez for a long moment, studying her face. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why did you prepare for war if you claimed to want peace?" Vasquez met his gaze without flinching. "Because peace is not something you can wish into existence, war leader. Peace is something you must be strong enough to enforce. We hoped you would come as friends. We prepared in case you came as enemies. You chose your approach and we responded accordingly." She touched a control on her arm, and a holographic display appeared between them. It showed a star map of known space with Earth highlighted in blue and Zarketh Prime in red. Other planets were marked in various colors representing the other species that populated this region of the galaxy. "Your attack killed 723 humans," Vasquez continued. "Every one of them is mourned. Every one of them is remembered. But we are not here for vengeance. We are here to make something clear to you and to everyone else who might be watching this conversation." She expanded the map, showing the locations where the battle had been broadcast, where sensors had picked up the distress signals, where other civilizations were even now discussing what had happened at Earth. "Humanity will never be prey again," she said firmly. "If you come to us in peace, if you approach with open hands and honest intentions, You will find us generous. We will trade with you. We will share knowledge with you. We will build friendships that benefit both our peoples. But if you come with weapons, if you approach with conquest in your hearts, you will find us ready. You will find us prepared. And you will find that we do not lose easily." She paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the final part of the message. "We are leaving coordinates for diplomatic contact with Earth. We are opening channels for trade and cultural exchange. We are offering peace to anyone who wants it. But understand this clearly. We are not offering weakness. We are not offering submission. We are offering partnership between equals. Take that offer or leave it. But never ever make the mistake of thinking we are easy targets again." The message was being broadcast across every frequency the ship could access. It was being recorded by sensors on 100 different worlds. Within days, it would be analyzed by military strategists and political leaders across known space. And everywhere it played, the same phrase would emerge in a dozen different languages. They provoked the humans. It would become a warning, a caution, a reminder that in a galaxy full of dangerous species, there was now one more to be treated with care, one that loved peace enough to prepare for war, and strong enough to choose which path it would walk. 5 years after humanity's first contact with the Zarketh, Earth was a different world. Not in appearance, the cities and oceans and forests looked much the same. But in every way that mattered, humanity had stepped out of its cradle and into a larger universe that was both more wonderful and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The Galactic Assembly met in a space station that orbited a neutron star, a location chosen because it was roughly equidistant from all major civilizations. Ambassador Michael Okafor stood in the central chamber, representing Earth in its first formal petition for recognition. He was a tall man with a diplomat's calm face, but his eyes held the steel of someone who had lived through the invasion and its aftermath. Around him, representatives from 43 different species watched with varying degrees of curiosity, concern, and calculation. Some looked like nothing Earth had ever imagined. Others were surprisingly familiar, convergent evolution producing forms that matched animals from home. All of them had heard the stories about the species that had destroyed the Zarketh Armada in 20 minutes. The Speaker of the Assembly, a crystalline being named Shard of Morning Light, addressed the chamber in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "The species known as humanity has petitioned for formal recognition and participation in Galactic Assembly affairs. This is unusual. Most species spend decades building relationships before seeking assembly status. Humanity has existed on the galactic stage for only 5 standard years, yet their impact has been considerable. The floor is open for discussion." Ambassador Vector of the Thelnari spoke first. His species had been watching Earth carefully since the battle, and their analysis was thorough. "Humanity presents a unique profile," he said. "They are technologically advanced, having reverse-engineered FTL capability in record time. They are militarily formidable, as the Zarketh learned to their cost, but more importantly, they have shown restraint and principle. They return prisoners. They offer aid without demanding submission. They respond to threats with overwhelming force but do not initiate conflict. I propose we grant them status as an Ascendant Protectorate." The chamber erupted in debate. Ascendant Protectorate was a rare designation. It was given to species that were too powerful to ignore but too principled to fear. Species that could defend themselves but chose diplomacy when possible. In the 5,000-year history of the Assembly, only 7 species had ever received this status. "They are too young," argued a representative from the Kilmar hegemony, a militaristic species that viewed humans as potential rivals. "They have no history of galactic interaction. How can we know they will not become aggressors?" Okafor raised his hand requesting permission to speak. When the speaker acknowledged him, he stepped forward calmly. "You ask if we will become aggressors," he said. "Let me answer by pointing to our actions, not our words. In 5 years, we have established trade relationships with 18 species. We have shared medical technology with the Vextari when plague threatened their colony worlds. We have sent ships to help evacuate the mining stations on Theta Ceti when the star went unstable. We have defended independent freighters from pirate attacks in the border regions." He brought up a holographic display showing dozens of incidents where human vessels had intervened to help others. Not conquests, not territorial expansion. Help, freely given and asking nothing in return except fair trade and mutual respect. "But we have also," he continued, his voice growing firmer, refused to allow any species to threaten Earth or our allies. When the Kresh sovereignty attempted to blockade human shipping lanes, we escorted our vessels through their territory with military protection. When slaver ships attacked our merchant marine, we hunted down every single vessel involved and freed every prisoner we found. We do not start fights, but we finish them. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many representatives as he could. Some looked away. Others met his gaze with respect or calculation. You wonder what kind of species we are. Let me tell you, we are builders and explorers. We are scientists and artists. We love peace and we pursue it whenever possible. But we learned a long time ago that peace cannot exist without the strength to defend it. We are not warriors by choice. We are warriors by necessity, and we will never apologize for being good at it. The vote took 3 hours of deliberation. In the end, 31 species voted in favor of granting humanity Ascendant Protectorate status. 8 voted against. 4 abstained. Earth was officially recognized as a galactic power, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. On Earth, the news was met with celebrations in every major city, but also with serious discussions about what this meant. Humanity was no longer alone. They had allies now, trading partners, friends among the stars, but they also had responsibilities. Other species would look to Earth for help, for protection, for the kind of principled strength that had earned them their reputation. 3 months after the assembly vote, a small species called the Pintar made a desperate call for assistance. Their colony world was being threatened by the same Kresh sovereignty that had tried to blockade human shipping. The Kresh were demanding tribute, threatening invasion if the Pintar did not surrender half their agricultural output and accept Kresh governors. The Pintar were not warriors. They were farmers and philosophers, a peaceful species that had never developed significant military capability. They had no way to defend themselves, and according to assembly rules, the Kresh were not technically breaking any laws. Demanding tribute was not the same as conquest, at least not in the careful language of galactic politics. But humanity remembered what it felt like to be threatened by a stronger power. They remembered the Zarketh ultimatum, the casual destruction of the space station, the deaths of 723 people who had done nothing to deserve that fate. A human fleet arrived at Pintar space within 2 weeks. 6 ships, not a massive force, but more than enough to make a statement. They positioned themselves in orbit around the colony world and transmitted a message on all frequencies. This is Commander Lisa Park of the UNES Shield of Earth. We are here at the request of the Pintar people. Any attack on this world will be considered an attack on Earth's allies, and will be responded to accordingly. We recommend all hostile forces withdraw to avoid conflict. The Kresh sovereignty sent 3 times as many ships to prove they would not be intimidated. They arrived expecting humans to back down or at least negotiate. What they got was Commander Park's calm voice explaining exactly what would happen if they opened fire. You have 2 choices. You can withdraw peacefully and we will forget this incident, or you can attack, and we will demonstrate why threatening our friends is a poor decision. Choose wisely, because you will not get another chance. The Kresh tested the resolve with a warning shot across the bow of a human ship. The response was immediate and devastating. Within 90 seconds, 3 Kresh vessels were disabled, their weapons offline and their shields collapsed. Not destroyed because humans still preferred not to kill when wounding would suffice, but utterly defeated, drifting in space and broadcasting surrender. The remaining Kresh ships withdrew. The Pintar were saved, and word spread across the galaxy that humanity meant what it said about defending its allies. It happened again on other worlds. A mining colony threatened by pirates, a research station targeted by territorial expansionists, independent traders being forced to pay protection money. Each time human ships appeared. Each time they gave the aggressors a choice between peace and defeat. And each time the aggressors learned that humans were not bluffing. In a military academy on Zarketh Prime, young warriors studied battle recordings of the 20-minute war. It had become required curriculum, analyzed and discussed in every strategic planning course. War leader Korthan himself sometimes visited the classes, sharing his perspective as the one who had faced humanity's defense firsthand. What is the lesson here? A young officer asked. That we should fear the humans? Korthan made a gesture that translated roughly as a thoughtful headshake. No, the lesson is about respect. The humans did not seek this fight. We brought it to them. They responded exactly as we would have responded if our roles were reversed. They defended their home with every weapon they had. That is not something to fear. That is something to understand. He pulled up the footage of Captain Vasquez returning the prisoners, of the medical care provided to wounded Zarketh warriors, of the dignity shown even in defeat. But here is the real lesson, he continued. They could have killed us all. They chose not to. That choice, that restraint in the moment of victory, that is what separates them from species we have faced before. They fight like demons when they must, but they choose to be better than demons when they can. That is strength. Real strength. The kind that changes the galaxy. In the final session of the Assembly's annual gathering, a young cadet from Earth named Jennifer Wu gave a speech that would be remembered and quoted for decades. She had been selected to represent her generation, the first humans to grow up knowing that they were not alone in the universe. Someone once asked my admiral why we prepare so thoroughly for war if we truly want peace, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber through translation systems that rendered her words in 40 languages. The admiral answered, because the only thing more dangerous than a species that loves war is a species that loves peace and is willing to fight to protect it. She looked out at the assembled representatives, at the species that had become humanity's neighbors in this vast galaxy. That is who we are. We build hospitals and schools. We write poetry and compose symphonies. We explore for the joy of discovery and create for the love of beauty. But we also stand ready to defend all of that against anyone who would take it away, not just for ourselves, for anyone who needs defending, because we believe that peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of justice, and justice sometimes requires strength. She paused, then delivered her final words with quiet conviction. We did not ask to be warriors, but we learned to be good at it because we had no choice, and now we use that skill to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is humanity's place in this galaxy. We are the ones who remember what it felt like to be weak and threatened, and we will never let anyone else feel that way as long as we have the power to prevent it. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then one by one, representatives from species across the galaxy rose in a gesture of respect. Even the Kresh, even the ones who feared human power, acknowledged the truth in those words. Earth had found its place among the stars. Not as conquerors, not as victims, but as something more complicated and more valuable. They were the defenders of peace, the protectors of the weak, and the reminder to any would-be aggressor that strength without wisdom was just another form of weakness. The 20-minute war had changed the galaxy, but it was humanity's choice of what to do after that victory that truly mattered. They had proven they could destroy. Now they were proving they could build, and the galaxy was better for it.